That, according to Edgar Cayce, the souls that exist today, yours, mine, and everyone's, may not have been created one by one, but instead were part of a single, profound act of creation that happened all at once. This idea alone is enough to shake centuries of religious interpretation and philosophical debate. Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, spoke of a beginning where all souls were formed together, radiating from one divine source, each carrying a spark of the infinite. And the question is, if we were all created at the same time, what does that mean about our journey, our individuality, and the struggles we face every day? Before we go further, let me ask you, do you believe all souls were created simultaneously, or do you think they emerged across time? Share your perspective in the comments. I'll heart every single one because your thoughts matter here. And while you're at it, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who seeks spiritual answers. Together, we're building a community that questions, learns, and grows. Cayce's readings went beyond the conventional. During a session in Virginia Beach in the early 1930s, a period marked by despair and economic collapse, a family came seeking answers. They wanted to understand suffering, destiny, and the invisible forces shaping their lives. In trance, Cayce described something breathtaking. The souls were not created in fragments, but in unity. This wasn't about human birth, but about spiritual origin. He explained that before material existence, there was a moment of divine intention where all souls came forth, equal in essence, limitless in potential, and yet free to choose. That freedom would define everything, the rise, the fall, the mistakes, and the triumphs. Think about the weight of this statement. If every soul came from the same moment, then the person you resent, the one you admire, and the one you've never met share the same root as you. This teaching carried a radical implication. No soul is more important, more ancient, or more valuable than another. In a world structured by hierarchy and power, Cayce's words were subversive. He painted a vision of humanity as a single spiritual family, where the differences we obsess over are temporary layers covering a timeless truth. This doesn't mean Cayce dismissed individuality. Quite the opposite. He said individuality is the very stage where the soul expresses its freedom. But the essence, the eternal part, is shared. This is why he often emphasized service to others, because helping another is, in reality, honoring the same source from which you yourself emerged. This truth, if accepted, could transform how we treat our neighbors, strangers, and even our enemies. It suggests that hatred, prejudice, and division are not only destructive, they are illusions that cover the deeper unity of creation. During one of his most impactful readings in 1932, Cayce stunned a group by declaring that all souls were created at the same time. For those present, who had been raised in traditions that saw humanity as unfolding across eras, with some closer to God and others farther, it was almost unthinkable. But Cayce wasn't speaking to win arguments. He was revealing a cosmic memory accessed in trance. He spoke of a moment when spirit emanated from God, not as separate fragments, but as a collective burst of life. Imagine a single radiant sun casting out infinite rays. Each ray is unique in direction, strength, and reach, but all come from the same source. That was Cayce's vision of the soul's origin, and in that analogy lies both comfort and responsibility. Comfort, because none of us is forgotten or left behind. Responsibility, because each ray carries the duty of returning, purified and conscious, to the source. This idea also sparked controversy. Critics argued it stripped religion of hierarchy, of chosen peoples, of favored groups. Cayce never denied cultural differences or sacred traditions, but he placed them in a larger frame. Humanity's story is not about a single tribe or nation being superior. It's about the collective soul family struggling to remember its origin. And this is why his teachings on reincarnation were so tightly connected. If all souls were created at once, then reincarnation wasn't about producing new souls. It was about old souls returning again and again to refine themselves. Life wasn't a one-time test, but a long journey where lessons could be repeated until learned. And this was revolutionary for people in Hopkinsville or New York, hearing these messages during the Depression or wartime. In times when people were desperate for meaning, Cayce gave them a vision of eternity, where no one is abandoned and every struggle has purpose. Cayce explained that the real tragedy was not that we were created imperfect, but that in our freedom, souls chose to wander away from their divine origin. In trance, he described this as the moment when souls, curious about matter, began to experiment with physicality. This choice wasn't evil in itself, it was exploration. But as some souls became more entangled in material desires, they drifted from the awareness of their unity. That's when the illusion of separation began, and with it came conflict, fear, and suffering. This was not a punishment from God, but a natural consequence of free will. Imagine children leaving home, exploring the wilderness, and forgetting where they came from. That, in Cayce's vision, was humanity's state. And through lifetime after lifetime, we are slowly remembering. Each incarnation, no matter how painful, becomes a classroom, guiding us back to the source. In one reading that deeply moved those present, Cayce said, "The purpose of the material world is that the soul may find its way back to its maker." This single sentence redefined existence for many. If all souls were created together, then life was never about competition for God's attention. It was about awakening to a truth we all share. During the Great Depression, when people lined up for bread and prayed for hope, Cayce reminded them that their worth was not measured by success or failure, wealth or poverty, but by the inner growth of the soul. This message carried healing power, because it told those who felt forgotten that they were part of the same divine beginning as kings and prophets. The playing field of eternity was level, and the journey was universal. Skeptics often challenged Cayce. If all souls were created at once, why do some seem more advanced, wiser, or spiritually gifted? Cayce responded with clarity. He explained that though creation was simultaneous, the choices each soul made shaped their development. Just as students in a classroom start together, but progress at different speeds, so do souls advance based on how they use their free will. Some embrace service, love, and humility, accelerating their growth. Others get stuck in cycles of pride, selfishness, or violence, needing more lifetimes to unlearn what separates them from their source. But none are lost forever. According to Cayce, God's love is infinite, and every soul will eventually find its way home. This perspective brought both accountability and hope. You are free to choose, but every choice echoes across lifetimes until it harmonizes with divine will. This understanding also illuminated Cayce's teachings on equality. He spoke often about how people should not judge others based on race, class, or religion. For him, these were temporary conditions of a single incarnation, not eternal measures of value. In Virginia Beach, when asked about racial divisions, he reminded people that the soul has no color. This statement, radical in the 1930s and 40s, cut through prejudice with spiritual truth. If all souls were created in unity, then divisions were illusions. This doesn't erase the reality of suffering caused by inequality, but it reframes it. Oppression and injustice are not reflections of divine will, but consequences of human misuse of freedom. And that means humanity has the power to change. Cayce's vision encouraged responsibility, not just for personal choices, but for collective ones, urging communities to reflect the unity of their origin. One of the most compelling aspects of Cayce's view was how it transformed the question of destiny. If souls were all created at the same time, then no one was born by accident and no one was expendable. Each life, no matter how brief or troubled, carried eternal significance. This was especially comforting for families who came to Cayce after losing loved ones. During the war years, when mothers in Virginia Beach or New York feared for their sons overseas, Cayce reassured them that the soul's journey was bigger than a single lifetime. Death was not the end, it was simply a return to the classroom between lessons. He emphasized that every soul, whether soldier, farmer, or child, carried the same divine spark, and that spark was indestructible. This message gave meaning to grief, reminding people that their loved ones were still part of the great spiritual family, still progressing, still alive in eternity. The idea of simultaneous creation also reshaped how people thought about time itself. For Cayce, eternity wasn't a straight line stretching endlessly forward. It was more like a vast ocean where all souls existed together, each wave moving differently, but all connected to the same body. In trance, he described the human struggle with time as an illusion, necessary for learning but not ultimate reality. Souls, he said, were timeless, existing before birth and continuing after death. What we call past and future were just perspectives from inside the material world. Imagine being inside a train looking at the scenery passing by. To you, things appear to move sequentially. But from above, someone watching the whole track sees beginning and end at once. That's how Cayce suggested God sees the soul's journey. Complete, whole and simultaneous, even as we live it moment by moment. This understanding was challenging for many who came from traditional religious backgrounds. If all souls were created at once, then where does the concept of new life fit in? Cayce clarified that while new bodies are constantly being born, the soul inhabiting that body is ancient, already carrying layers of experience. This perspective reframed ideas of fate, destiny, and even injustice. A child born into wealth and privilege, and another born into poverty and hardship, were not created at different times with different worth. They were souls on different stages of their journey, learning different lessons chosen or shaped by past actions. Far from diminishing the importance of compassion, this teaching made it essential. Because if all souls were created together, then indifference to another's suffering was like ignoring your own reflection in a mirror. In one particularly moving session that changed the life of a family, Cayce spoke about the loss of a child. He told them the soul was not gone, nor was it newly created, but part of the same eternal moment of origin. The child's brief life was a chapter, not the full book. This comforted them deeply, for it meant their grief wasn't about separation forever, but about temporary distance. The soul, Cayce assured, would continue learning and growing, meeting them again in different forms, until the great reunion with the Source. This is why his teachings on reincarnation always came tied to love and responsibility. If we were all created together, then in every face we meet, we encounter a soul who began the journey at the same instant as we did. That realization, if taken seriously, dissolves the pride that makes us believe we are ahead of others. Cayce's vision also pointed toward a collective destiny. He often said that humanity's progress was not just about individuals finding God, but about groups, nations, and even civilizations awakening together. This is where his readings about Atlantis came in. He claimed that many souls alive in the 20th century had once lived in that ancient civilization, carrying karmic lessons into their present lives. Whether people accepted Atlantis as literal or symbolic, the point was clear. Souls don't evolve in isolation. We rise and fall together, shaped by shared histories and collective choices. If all souls were created at once, then our fates are intertwined. This is why service and compassion are not optional virtues, but survival strategies for the soul. What you do for another soul is ultimately done for yourself, because at the level of origin, there is no separation. These teachings unsettled the scientific minds of his time. During the war years, psychologists and theologians debated whether Cayce's visions were credible or hallucinations. Yet what kept people returning to him was not abstract theory, but the transformative power of his message. People left his sessions with hope, with a sense of dignity restored, with courage to face another day. The idea that every soul was born in the same divine act made them feel less alone, less lost in the chaos of history. For soldiers preparing for battle, for families struggling with hunger, for those mourning loved ones, Cayce's words gave them a larger framework. Life had meaning, suffering had purpose, and death was not the end. In that sense, whether or not one accepted every detail, the impact was undeniable. His readings changed how people lived, loved, and faced the unknown. One of the most striking consequences of Cayce's teaching on the simultaneous creation of souls is how it reframes human conflict. If we were all created together, then wars, prejudice, and hatred are essentially battles against our own brothers and sisters. Cayce often emphasized that the greatest challenge of the soul is not survival but learning cooperation. He described humanity's divisions as symptoms of forgetting our origin. When we forget that every enemy began the journey at the same moment we did, we justify cruelty. But when we remember, compassion becomes not just a virtue but a necessity. In trance, Cayce once said, "You cannot harm another without harming yourself." This was more than moral advice. It was a spiritual law rooted in the reality of shared creation. Every act of kindness or cruelty echoes across the web of souls, eventually returning to the one who sent it out. This teaching found practical expression in how Cayce counseled individuals. During a session that left an indelible mark on those present, he advised a man bitter with resentment toward his business rivals. Cayce told him that his enemies were not obstacles placed by chance, but souls journeying alongside him since the very beginning. Their conflicts, Cayce explained, were opportunities for growth, not eternal separations. The man was stunned because he realized he had been fighting not strangers, but companions from the same divine moment of origin. This shifted his perspective, transforming bitterness into humility. Cayce's ability to link the metaphysical truth of simultaneous creation with the daily struggles of ordinary people gave his message unique power. It wasn't abstract philosophy, it was guidance for living with greater awareness. Another layer of this teaching emerged when Cayce spoke about the destiny of humanity as a whole. He described human history as cycles of forgetting and remembering, where souls would plunge into material pursuits and then rise again into spiritual awareness. If all souls were created at once, then no civilization is truly new. Instead, each represents a stage in the collective memory of humanity. When he spoke of Atlantis, he wasn't simply recounting legends. He was pointing out that many of the same souls who once misused power in ancient times were alive again in modern society, facing the same temptations. The collapse of civilizations was not divine punishment, but the result of choices made by souls who forgot their unity. And the rebirth of civilizations, too, was an opportunity for the same souls to choose differently, to realign with their origin. This perspective carries a sobering message for us today. If all souls were created together, then the crises of our era, climate change, inequality, violence, are not isolated problems of a few. They are collective lessons for the entire soul family. Cayce's voice, though rooted in the 20th century, speaks directly into the 21st. What happens to one part of humanity eventually touches all, because we share the same beginning and the same end. It challenges us to see beyond personal survival into the reality of shared destiny. For Cayce, spirituality was never about escaping the world, but transforming it. Remembering that we were created together calls us to act with responsibility, not only for our own sake, but for the generations to come. The emotional depth of this teaching was felt most strongly in the stories of personal healing that emerged from Cayce's sessions. People came to him not only for physical remedies, but for answers about their place in the universe. Imagine sitting in a small room in Virginia Beach, listening to a man in trance describe your soul as ancient, eternal, and equal to every other. For many, this dissolved lifelong feelings of insignificance. They walked away believing their suffering was not meaningless, but part of a larger tapestry woven since the beginning of time. This sense of dignity and belonging changed lives. It gave people strength to endure poverty, illness, or grief, because they felt connected to something greater than their immediate pain. Cayce also linked the origin of souls to what he called the records of time, or what many came to understand as the Akashic records. In trance, he often described accessing these records as if opening a vast library, where the entire journey of every soul could be seen. If all souls were created at the same moment, then the Akashic records were the ongoing documentation of how each one expressed its freedom. Every choice, every act of kindness or cruelty, every step toward or away from the source was written there. For seekers, this was both humbling and empowering. It meant nothing was lost and nothing could be hidden. It also meant that growth was always possible, because even mistakes became part of the soul's learning curve. Cayce reminded people that the goal was not perfection in a single life, but awakening across many lifetimes until remembrance of unity was complete. During a session in the early 1940s, At a time when the world was engulfed in war, Cayce explained to a grieving mother that her son who had died in combat was not lost to nothingness. He was, in fact, continuing his journey, returning to the source step by step, just like every other soul created in that original moment. She asked if his death had meaning, if the sacrifice was not in vain. Cayce responded that while war is always a tragedy born of human forgetting, the soul itself is indestructible, and every experience, even suffering, can be redeemed as part of growth. His words gave her peace because they placed her son's story inside the larger story of all souls. She was no longer alone in her grief. She was connected to the eternal family of creation. Cayce's vision invited people to look at their lives with new eyes. Struggles that seemed random began to look like lessons. Relationships that felt unbearable began to look like opportunities to practice patience, forgiveness, or courage. He reminded people that since all souls were created at once, no encounter was truly accidental. Every meeting, whether with a loved one or a difficult person, was part of a pattern woven since the dawn of spiritual creation. This is why he placed such importance on love. Love was not just an emotion, but the force that reminded souls of their origin. To love was to remember, to hate was to forget. For him, love was the most practical way to accelerate the soul's journey back to God. This teaching was not always easy to hear. For those suffering deeply, being told that their pain was part of a larger plan could feel overwhelming. Yet Cayce never dismissed suffering. Instead, he acknowledged it as real, as heavy, but also as meaningful. He explained that pain often cracks the shell of forgetfulness, making space for the soul to remember its divine beginning. In this way, even sorrow could become sacred. Families who came to him broken often left with tears of relief, not because their problems vanished, but because they finally saw purpose in them, and that sense of purpose gave them the courage to keep walking their path. Cayce's emphasis on unity of creation turned personal tragedies into stepping stones, reminding people that no soul was ever alone, no matter how dark the road seemed. Another dimension of Cayce's teaching on the origin of souls is how it intersects with human responsibility in daily life. If all souls were created at the same time, then every choice we make today contributes not only to our growth, but to the evolution of the entire soul family. Cayce emphasized again and again that thoughts are things. He meant that our inner world shapes not just our own destiny, but the collective vibration of humanity. A thought of anger ripples outward, just as a thought of compassion heals beyond what we can see. When people asked him how to live with integrity, his answer was simple. Act as if every soul you meet has been with you since the beginning, because it has. That awareness, he said, transforms ordinary actions into sacred opportunities. The way you treat a stranger on the street echoes into eternity. Cayce also reminded seekers that remembering our shared origin does not erase individuality. Each soul, though created in the same instant, carries unique qualities, talents, and paths. He described the soul as a spark from the same flame, but each spark shining differently as it returns to its source. This means no one's journey can be compared or measured against another's. A life of hardship does not mean a soul is less evolved. It may mean that soul has chosen to face difficult lessons sooner. A life of comfort does not mean superiority. It may be a test of humility and service. By seeing life this way, envy loses its grip and gratitude takes its place. Cayce's teaching calls us to honor diversity, not as division, but as the unfolding of unity in countless forms. During the post-war years, as soldiers returned and society shifted, many sought Cayce's guidance about the meaning of progress. Was humanity doomed to repeat cycles of conflict? Cayce's response was rooted in the idea of simultaneous creation. He said that because all souls began together, the destiny of the world depended on collective remembrance. Civilization advances when more individuals awaken to their shared origin. He urged people not to wait for governments or leaders to enforce peace, but to begin with themselves. A single act of kindness, he insisted, could tip the balance because it aligned with the truth of unity. This was not naive optimism, it was a spiritual principle. Every soul carries responsibility for the whole, because the whole began together. And when enough souls live by this truth, the trajectory of humanity changes. One of Cayce's most repeated messages was that life is a school and earth is the classroom. If all souls were created in one divine act, then every soul has enrolled in the same school, learning different subjects at different times. He told people not to despise the lessons they faced, no matter how hard. Each difficulty, he explained, was designed not by cruelty but by opportunity. Souls do not grow by avoiding challenges, but by facing them. Just as classmates in school may struggle in one subject and excel in another, souls progress unevenly, but always with the potential to master what is needed. And the final graduation is not escape from life, but the full remembrance of unity with God. This idea resonated deeply with those searching for meaning, giving them a framework where suffering became a path, not a prison. In the end, Edgar Cayce's teaching about the origin of souls was not just a mystical idea. It was a call to live differently. If all souls were created at once, then there is no stranger, no outsider, no soul more worthy of God's love than another. This means every act of service, every word of kindness, and every choice for compassion is not wasted. It is part of the great return to the source. Cayce urged people to see beyond the illusions of division and to remember the eternal truth. We began together, and we will return together. That vision gives meaning to our struggles, dignity to our journeys, and hope for our future. It transforms life from random chance into a sacred mission, and it reminds us that while we may forget our unity in the noise of the world, the soul never forgets. It carries the memory of its divine beginning, waiting for us to awaken to it. So now let me ask you, what do you believe about the origin of the soul? Do you feel that we were all created at once, or that souls emerge across time? Share your thoughts in the comments. I will heart every single one because your perspective matters, and together we build a circle of seekers searching for truth. And if this message touched you, like this video, share it with a friend who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next revelation. Each week, we dive deeper into Cayce's teachings, uncovering wisdom that still transforms lives today. Remember this, you are not alone, you have never been alone, because your soul was created in the same eternal moment as all others. And no matter how far you feel from God, you are still part of that original light, destined to return whole and radiant to the source from which you came. If I told you that one of the most overlooked secrets to both physical health and spiritual clarity was hidden not in a modern science lab, but in the words of a man lying on a couch in Virginia Beach during the Great Depression, would you believe it? Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, shocked countless families when he revealed that fasting, something as simple as abstaining from food, could be one of the most powerful tools for cleansing the body and uplifting the soul. But here is the twist. He did not recommend extreme practices or reckless deprivation. Instead, he gave 5 clear principles rooted in compassion and balance that could transform the way a person approaches fasting forever. Before we dive into them, let me ask you a question. Have you ever tried fasting, and if so, did you do it for your body or for your spirit? Write your answer in the comments, and I will personally mark every comment with a little heart because your perspective matters in this conversation. And while you're there, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that this message reaches more souls searching for truth. The image of fasting in our culture often comes with extremes, starving for days, punishing the body, or treating it as a test of willpower. Yet, in one of his most impactful readings in 1932, Cayce gently shifted the perspective. He described fasting not as punishment, but as purification. He said the body, like a temple, sometimes needs to be cleansed so that the spirit can flow freely within it. Imagine hearing that in the middle of the Great Depression, when families were already struggling with hunger. The idea that fasting could be something sacred, not just forced by poverty, was revolutionary. People came to him in Virginia Beach, seeking guidance not only for diseases, but also for clarity in their spiritual lives, and Cayce's words often brought tears to their eyes. The first truth he offered was that fasting is most powerful when done with intention. Without intention, skipping meals is just hunger. But with prayer, with meditation, with a focus on cleansing both mind and body, fasting becomes a bridge between the human and the divine. In sessions that shocked even physicians present, Cayce explained that fasting should be accompanied by pure water, by quiet reflection, and by gratitude for the cleansing process. He said that in those moments, the body begins to reset, not only biologically, but spiritually. The bloodstream is purified, and the mind finds new clarity. This was not mystical exaggeration. It was echoed by people who, after following his advice, described renewed strength and a sense of lightness they had never known before. But Cayce never encouraged extremes. He repeatedly warned against pushing the body beyond its limits. "Let moderation be the key," he insisted, during one session that changed the life of an entire family. He told a worried mother that fasting for days without guidance could harm more than heal. Instead, he suggested simple fasts, one day a week or a few days with careful preparation, always accompanied by prayer and plenty of water. The wisdom was clear. Fasting should align with health, not fight against it. This principle resonates today even more, as modern science confirms that intermittent fasting can restore balance when done wisely, but leads to danger if abused. Cayce's voice, echoing across decades, still calls us back to balance. The second truth he revealed was about what comes after fasting. Many people break their fast with heavy meals, but Cayce said this is the worst mistake. In his words, the body is like a delicate instrument after cleansing. It should be treated gently. He recommended breaking the fast with citrus fruits, fresh vegetables, or simple broths. Nothing greasy, nothing processed, nothing that shocks the system. In one of his documented sessions in Hopkinsville, he explained that returning to heavy foods too quickly would undo the benefits of fasting and burden the body even more than before. He compared it to sweeping a floor clean and then immediately throwing mud upon it. The metaphor struck those listening in the room and remains just as vivid today. And this is only the beginning, because in just a moment, I will reveal Cayce's third principle of fasting, the one that most surprised even ministers and doctors who consulted him. It was a principle not about the body, but about the soul, and it changed everything we thought fasting was supposed to mean. The third truth Cayce revealed is perhaps the most profound. Fasting is not only about what you take out of the body, but about what you allow into the soul. During several readings, he emphasized that when the stomach is empty, the heart and mind must be filled with prayer, meditation, and higher thoughts. He warned that fasting without a spiritual focus could leave a person vulnerable, not stronger. In one memorable session during the war years, he explained to a soldier's family that fasting should be used as a tool to draw closer to God, to quiet the restless mind, and to open a channel of communication with the higher self. This insight startled even ministers who attended his sessions, because it reframed fasting from a mere discipline of the flesh into a sacred opportunity for communion with the divine. Cayce described the body as a temple that is either cleansed or polluted by what enters it, not just food but thoughts, emotions, and intentions. When people came to him in Virginia Beach seeking healing for their ailments, he often asked them to consider not just what they ate, but what they thought and felt during times of fasting. He said, anger, fear, and resentment could poison the body as much as unhealthy food. But gratitude, faith, and forgiveness could heal it in ways that even physicians could not explain. Imagine sitting in that room, listening to a man in trance calmly deliver truths that pierce deeper than any medical textbook of the time. It was both unsettling and liberating. The fourth principle Cayce highlighted was the rhythm of fasting. He stressed that it was not about extremes but about consistency. In one of his most impactful readings, he explained that setting aside one day each week for fasting, combined with prayer and meditation, was more beneficial than sporadic, punishing fasts. A gentle rhythm allowed the body to expect renewal, like the tides of the sea cleansing the shore again and again. People who followed this pattern often reported not just better digestion and clearer skin, but also sharper focus and a calmer spirit. These testimonies, preserved in the archives of the ARE, became living proof that his counsel was not theoretical, it was transformative. Yet Cayce's words carried a tone of warning as well. He reminded seekers that fasting should always be guided by wisdom and love, not by ego or a desire for control. "Do not fast to test the body," he once said. fast to cleanse and renew it. This distinction struck deep because many had believed that enduring hunger was a test of strength or holiness. Cayce flipped the perspective. True holiness was found in balance, not in abuse of the body. He showed that fasting, done with the right rhythm, could be an act of love. Love for the body, love for the soul, and love for the God who gave both. The fifth and final principle Cayce revealed about fasting brings everything together. He taught that fasting should always be followed by service. What does this mean? After cleansing the body and uplifting the spirit, a person is called to turn that renewed energy outward, toward others. In one documented case during the Great Depression, a woman came to him seeking relief from years of illness. Cayce advised her to fast, yes, but he also told her that when she broke her fast, she should use her renewed strength to help those around her. "Do for others as you have been renewed," he said gently. This simple phrase carried a radical truth. Fasting is not only for personal gain, but to prepare you to serve, to heal, to uplift. This fifth principle is what makes Cayce's teachings unique. It shifts fasting from self-centered discipline to selfless preparation. It echoes the teachings of Christ himself, who fasted in the desert not just to purify his own body, but to prepare for his mission of love. For Cayce, fasting was never meant to end with the individual. It was meant to ripple out, blessing families, communities, even nations. And those who practiced it with this heart often found not only healing for their own bodies, but unexpected doors opening in their lives, opportunities for service, reconciliation, and peace that they never thought possible. But here is where Cayce's wisdom becomes even more extraordinary. Because in the midst of these fasting principles, he once revealed a vision that connected physical cleansing with the destiny of entire civilizations. In just a moment, I will share with you that vision, one that connected the rhythm of the body with the rhythm of history itself, a truth so bold that even today it continues to stir debate among seekers and scholars. When Cayce spoke of fasting, it was never in isolation. He always tied it to a bigger picture, the way the human body reflects the larger rhythms of the universe. In one trance session during the 1930s, he compared the cycles of fasting to the cycles of the Earth itself. Just as the planet requires seasons of rest and renewal, so too does the human body. This was more than a metaphor. It was a call to live in harmony with creation. He suggested that the same God who designed the tides and the changing of the seasons also designed the body to thrive when given moments of pause and cleansing. For those listening, this was both humbling and empowering. Suddenly, fasting was not just about personal health. It was about aligning with the very laws of the cosmos. During the war years, when fear and anxiety swept across nations, Cayce often reminded families that fasting could bring not only physical resilience, but also emotional stability. In a session that touched the hearts of parents who had sons overseas, he explained that setting aside a day for fasting and prayer created a spiritual shield. He didn't mean that it magically protected soldiers from harm, but that it strengthened families at home, giving them clarity, patience, and hope. At a time when the world seemed to be crumbling, this connection between a simple practice and spiritual resilience gave people something tangible to hold on to. It was as if fasting became a quiet act of resistance against despair. But what truly shocked many listeners was Cayce's vision that linked fasting with the evolution of civilizations. In one of his trance states, he described how ancient peoples had used fasting not just as a religious act, but as preparation for receiving divine guidance. He spoke of Atlantean priests who fasted before entering the temples of healing, of Hebrew prophets who fasted before receiving visions, and of early Christians who fasted before taking on missions of service. For Cayce, fasting was woven into the very fabric of human history, a sacred practice that allowed individuals and entire cultures to tune into higher frequencies of consciousness. Hearing this, some skeptics in the room could not contain their disbelief, yet others felt a deep stirring, as if a forgotten truth had just been uncovered from the depths of memory. Modern listeners often wonder, how could a man with little formal education, lying on a couch in Virginia Beach, speak with such confidence about both the body and the destiny of civilizations? The answer lies in the way Cayce described his gift. He said he was reading from a universal source, what he called the Akashic Records, the memory of all souls and all time. When he spoke of fasting, he was not merely giving dietary advice, he was unveiling a principle etched into the very design of human existence. That is why his words carried such weight. They were not opinions, but revelations, and families who followed them often found results they could not deny. Bodies healed, minds renewed, spirits uplifted. One story from the archives tells of a man in New York who had battled chronic digestive issues for years. Doctors gave him medicines that brought little relief. Desperate, he traveled to Virginia Beach and asked Cayce for help. In trance, Cayce told him to adopt a rhythm of weekly fasting, combined with prayer and specific dietary adjustments. The man followed the guidance, and within months his health improved dramatically. But what touched him even more was the change in his mind. He said he felt calmer, more centered, more at peace. For him, fasting was not just about healing his stomach, but about healing his life. Stories like this spread quietly, whispered from one family to another, until people across the country began to see fasting not as a hardship, but as a sacred gift. Yet Cayce never wanted people to idolize the practice itself. He warned that fasting without humility and service could become empty. "It is not the fast that saves you," he said in one session, "but what you do with the clarity it brings." Those words still echo today, reminding us that fasting is not the destination, but the doorway. It is what happens after, the choices you make, the love you give, the service you render, that truly matters. This is why his fifth principle remains so crucial. Fasting must lead to service. It is in serving others that the energy purified within us flows outward, completing the circle of renewal. And so when we step back and look at Cayce's 5 principles together, they form a tapestry. Fasting with intention, breaking the fast gently, aligning body and spirit, creating rhythm, and serving others. It is a tapestry woven not only through his words, but through the lived experiences of countless people who trusted his guidance. But here's the question for you. If Cayce was right that fasting can align us with divine rhythms, then what might happen if entire communities embraced it, not just individuals? Could fasting, as he suggested, ripple outward to bring healing to societies, even to nations? In a moment I will share how Cayce hinted at this very possibility, and why his vision of fasting may be more relevant now than ever before. Cayce often insisted that fasting was not just a private matter, it could shape the destiny of families, communities, even nations. In a session recorded during the turbulence of the 1940s, he told a group in Virginia Beach that when groups of people fasted together with prayer and intention, their collective energy created waves that reached far beyond what the eye could see. He described this energy as a light made brighter by many candles, suggesting that when individuals aligned their bodies and spirits through fasting, they contributed to a larger field of healing that could influence the world itself. Imagine being in that room in the shadow of war, hearing that a simple act like fasting could ripple across oceans, touching soldiers, leaders, and nations in ways unseen but deeply felt. For many, it was a lifeline of hope in a time of darkness. This collective dimension of fasting was not theoretical. During the Great Depression, Cayce advised families who were struggling not only with poverty, but with despair to set aside days for fasting and prayer. He explained that even though they lacked food by circumstance, choosing to fast intentionally transformed hardship into holiness. He told them that their act of conscious fasting turned scarcity into a spiritual offering, lifting them out of fear and into faith. One family later wrote that after following his guidance, their home was filled with unexpected peace, even as financial struggles continued. They described it as if a weight had been lifted, not from their wallets, but from their hearts. These stories became part of the living testimony of Cayce's legacy, that fasting was never merely about food, but about transforming the energy of life itself. The idea that fasting could impact nations may sound impossible to modern ears, yet Cayce spoke about it in terms of alignment. He said that when individuals purify their bodies and open their spirits, they are better equipped to act with clarity, compassion, and justice. Multiply that by thousands, and entire communities could begin to shift. As the body is renewed, he once said, so too can a people be renewed. This statement has echoed for decades through the halls of the ARE, reminding seekers that the healing of the world begins with the healing of the individual, and fasting is one path toward that renewal. But Cayce was always practical. He grounded even his most mystical statements in simple actions. He didn't tell people to fast for weeks on end, nor did he demand ascetic practices. Instead, he encouraged ordinary men and women, farmers in Kentucky, businessmen in New York, mothers in Ohio, to embrace small, steady rhythms of fasting combined with prayer. It was in the ordinary consistency that the extraordinary emerged. He believed that God met people not in their extremes, but in their humble devotion, and that remains one of the most comforting truths for us today. Looking back now, nearly a century after those words were spoken, the relevance is striking. Modern science affirms what Cayce revealed. Fasting, when done properly, cleanses the body, sharpens the mind, and renews the spirit. Yet science alone cannot explain the deeper transformation, that sense of connection to something greater, the awareness that we are more than flesh and blood. That is where Cayce's insights shine. He bridged the gap between body and spirit, showing that one cannot be healed without the other. His 5 principles of fasting are not relics of the past. They are invitations to live more fully in the present. So if you've ever wondered whether fasting could be more than a health trend, Cayce's teachings answer with a resounding yes. They remind us that fasting, done with intention, humility, and service, is not deprivation. It is preparation. It is preparing the body for clarity, the mind for peace, and the soul for service. And when practiced together, it prepares communities for renewal. The question that remains is simple yet profound. What could change in your own life, in your family, or even in your community, if you embraced fasting not as punishment, but as a sacred rhythm? Before we close, let me invite you once again. If this message touched you, leave a comment below telling us your experience with fasting or your thoughts on what Cayce revealed. I will mark each comment with a heart, because your voice is part of this shared journey. And please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that more seekers can join us. Together, we can keep alive the wisdom that still has the power to transform lives today. As we bring all of this together, let us remember the 5 principles that Edgar Cayce revealed about fasting. First, fasting must begin with intention. Without intention, it is only hunger. With intention, it becomes purification and alignment with the divine. Second, the way we break the fast matters. Gentle foods like citrus fruits, vegetables, or simple broths respect the body and allow it to continue its renewal. Third, fasting is a spiritual act as much as a physical one. When the body is emptied, the soul must be filled with prayer, gratitude, and higher thoughts. Fourth, rhythm is essential. Fasting consistently, even just 1 day a week, creates a sacred pattern that builds health and clarity over time. And fifth, fasting must lead to service. The renewed energy we gain is meant to be poured into helping others, completing the cycle of love and renewal. These 5 truths, spoken by a man who had no medical degree, no formal theological training, but who spoke from a deeper source, have stood the test of time. Families in the Great Depression found hope in them. Soldiers' parents during the war found strength in them. And today, in a world filled with noise, anxiety, and endless distractions, these principles shine like a compass, pointing us back to balance. Fasting, as Cayce described it, is not outdated. It is timeless. Think about this. Every time you fast with prayerful intention, you are joining a lineage that stretches back through the prophets, through Christ in the desert, through ancient priests who prepared themselves for sacred service. You are aligning yourself with rhythms greater than your own. You are saying yes to being a vessel of clarity, peace, and renewal. And in a world so desperately in need of healing, that choice matters more than ever. Cayce's legacy lives on, not just in the archives of the ARE in Virginia Beach, but in every life that puts his wisdom into practice. When we fast with intention, when we break the fast gently, when we fill our minds with prayer, when we keep the rhythm, and when we serve others, we are living the wisdom he channeled. We are proving that truth does not die. It endures through those who embody it. And that is the invitation for you today. So now the question is yours. Will you see fasting as deprivation, Or will you see it as preparation? Will you use it merely as a health trend? Or will you embrace it as a sacred rhythm that connects body, mind, and soul? The choice is yours, and the potential is extraordinary. If this message resonated with you, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Tell us what fasting means to you, or if you've ever tried it with spiritual intention. I will mark each comment with a heart, because your experiences and reflections matter here. And please, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe, so that together we can continue spreading the wisdom of Edgar Cayce to all who are seeking truth in these times. The world is hungry not just for food, but for meaning, for balance, for connection to the divine. And perhaps through something as simple yet profound as fasting, we can begin to satisfy that hunger. This is not the end of the story, it is only the beginning. Because once you understand the wisdom behind fasting, you begin to wonder, what other everyday practices hold hidden spiritual power? What else did Cayce reveal that can transform the way we live, think, and serve? Stay with us, because the journey into his teachings is far from over. When we step back and look at the arc of Cayce's teachings, one thing becomes clear. He was never offering quick fixes or superficial advice. Every reading was an invitation to live in deeper harmony, with the body, with the spirit, and with God. Fasting was simply one doorway into that harmony, but it carried lessons that extend far beyond diet. It taught moderation, humility, patience, and service, qualities the modern world often forgets. Imagine how different our culture would be if, instead of chasing constant consumption, we embraced moments of intentional pause, silence, and renewal. Cayce believed that such a shift could change not only individual lives, but the direction of society itself. In the archives of the RE, preserved in Virginia Beach, countless testimonies echo this truth. Families who once came to him in despair later wrote letters describing how fasting with intention transformed their homes. Mothers spoke of children who became calmer and healthier. Fathers wrote about finding new strength after years of fatigue. Ministers described how prayer and fasting brought clarity to their sermons. These stories were not sensational headlines. They were quiet, consistent transformations that spread like ripples through communities. It was in these ordinary miracles that Cayce's extraordinary wisdom proved itself. And yet, he always brought people back to balance. In one session during the post-war years, a man asked whether fasting for longer periods would bring greater spiritual power. Cayce's answer was strikingly simple. The power comes not from the length of the fast, but from the spirit in which it is done. That statement dismantled the belief that extreme practices lead to greater holiness. Instead, it affirmed that God honors sincerity over severity, love over self-punishment. This perspective freed countless seekers from the trap of spiritual pride, reminding them that true transformation begins in humility. Today, when fasting is often discussed in the context of diets, weight loss, or health trends, Cayce's words cut through the noise. He reminds us that fasting is sacred when it connects us to something greater than ourselves. Science can explain the biological benefits, detoxification, improved metabolism, cellular repair. But Cayce points to the deeper truth, that fasting clears the channels for divine energy to flow. This is why so many people who followed his counsel reported not just physical healing but emotional peace, mental clarity, and spiritual renewal. They didn't just feel lighter in body, they felt lighter in soul. There is also a lesson here about how wisdom endures. Cayce spoke these words nearly a century ago, in a time without modern research on intermittent fasting, without the internet to spread his readings, without the global wellness industry. And yet, his insights align with what science confirms today, while also going beyond it, offering spiritual dimensions that no laboratory can measure. This is why his voice continues to matter, not as a relic of the past, but as a guidepost for the present and future. Perhaps the greatest challenge is not believing Cayce's words, but living them. It is easy to hear about fasting and nod in agreement. It is harder to set aside the time, to quiet the noise, to let go of constant consumption. Yet, those who take the step often find that it is not nearly as difficult as they feared, and that the rewards far exceed the effort. One day of fasting, guided by prayer and intention, can open doors of clarity that no amount of striving could achieve. That is the paradox Cayce unveiled. By emptying ourselves, we become full. So the invitation remains as alive today as it was in the 1930s and 1940s. Will you take it? Will you allow fasting to become not just a health practice, but a sacred rhythm? Will you use it not to punish yourself, but to prepare yourself for peace, for clarity, for service? These are the questions that linger, and only you can answer them. To understand the depth of Cayce's wisdom on fasting, we must look beyond the individual body and even beyond the historical moment in which he lived. Cayce suggested that fasting was not just a practice for one person or one faith, but a universal law woven into the soul's relationship with God. He pointed out how prophets of the Old Testament fasted before receiving visions, how Christ himself fasted for 40 days before beginning his ministry, and how early Christian communities fasted before great decisions. He saw these not as coincidences, but as evidence that fasting is a timeless key to unlocking higher states of awareness. For Cayce, fasting was never about deprivation. It was about preparation. It was the preparation of the vessel so that divine light could shine more clearly through it. This universal perspective also explains why people from such different walks of life found resonance in his words. Farmers in Kentucky, business leaders in New York, and mothers in small towns all received the same encouragement: to cleanse not only their bodies but their spirits through fasting. Some of them came skeptical, expecting medical prescriptions or complicated regimens. Instead, they heard simple words: drink water, rest the body, pray, and keep your thoughts pure. These instructions often seemed too simple at first, but when practiced, they brought results that couldn't be denied. Many testified not only to physical improvements, but to a renewed sense of purpose in their daily lives. There is something deeply moving in the way Cayce connected the most ordinary act, abstaining from food, with the most extraordinary reality: union with the divine. It reminds us that spirituality is not locked away in temples or hidden in mysteries. It is accessible in the simple rhythms of life. Fasting became a way to pause, to realign, to remember who we are and why we are here. For people who felt lost in the chaos of the Great Depression or the fear of war, that reminder was more than comforting. It was life-saving. Cayce also warned that fasting could not be separated from one's inner state. He explained that if someone fasted while harboring anger, resentment, or fear, the benefits would be diminished. In contrast, if they fasted with gratitude, humility, and prayer, the benefits multiplied. This teaching is as practical today as it was then. It is not enough to simply abstain from food. One must also abstain from toxic thoughts and emotions during the fast. The body and the spirit are intertwined, and fasting purifies both when practiced with love and reverence. Modern seekers sometimes struggle with this idea. They want quick results, measurable outcomes, instant transformations. But Cayce's counsel pushes against that impatience. He urged people to see fasting as part of a lifelong rhythm, not a one-time experiment. Just as the earth has seasons, just as the tides rise and fall, so too should the human being embrace cycles of cleansing and renewal. This perspective turns fasting into a sustainable practice, not a passing trend. It becomes a rhythm that shapes character, builds resilience, and opens the heart to service. As we near the close of these reflections, think about how Cayce's 5 principles fit into your own life. They are not rules to be followed rigidly, but invitations to walk a path of balance, intention, gentle breaking of the fast, spiritual focus, rhythm, and service. These are guideposts. Each one calls us not just to abstain from food, but to embrace a way of being that is lighter, freer, and more attuned to the divine. The beauty of this path is that it requires no wealth, no special status, no external authority. Anyone, anywhere, can step into it. And in doing so, they step into a legacy of wisdom that continues to heal and inspire nearly a century after it was first spoken. But there is still one more truth that Cayce left us with, one that ties fasting to the very purpose of life itself. And in our final moments together, we will uncover that truth, so that you can carry it not only as knowledge, but as a lived experience. Cayce often reminded seekers that every physical practice carried a spiritual parallel, and fasting was no exception. At its core, he said, fasting was not about food at all, it was about the soul learning to let go. Just as the body lets go of meals for a time, the soul is invited to let go of fear, pride, resentment, and all that weighs it down. In one of his most memorable sessions, he explained that the greatest purpose of fasting was to make room for God. Those 4 words, make room for God, summarize the essence of everything he taught. The body becomes lighter, the mind becomes clearer, and the soul becomes more open to divine presence. That is the hidden treasure behind the discipline. When viewed this way, fasting is no longer just a practice of health or even of spiritual growth. It becomes a metaphor for life itself. Life constantly asks us to let go of what no longer serves us so that something greater can enter. Every ending is a kind of fast. Every new beginning is a kind of feast. Cayce's wisdom about fasting mirrors the eternal rhythm of surrender and renewal that shapes our journey as souls. And perhaps that is why his words continue to resonate, because they do not just tell us how to fast, they tell us how to live. As we close this exploration of Cayce's 5 principles of fasting, let us hold on to the truth that fasting is not deprivation, but preparation. It prepares us for clarity, for peace, for service, and ultimately for deeper connection with the divine. Whether you choose to fast 1 day a week or a few days in a season, the invitation is the same: to step into a rhythm of renewal that aligns your body, mind, and soul with the greater order of creation. In a world full of chaos and noise, that rhythm can be a sanctuary. Now it is your turn. What do you think about Cayce's wisdom on fasting? Have you ever experienced fasting in a way that felt spiritual, not just physical? Share your story in the comments below. I will personally mark every comment with a heart, because your journey matters here. And please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that together we can continue to spread Cayce's timeless teachings to all who are searching for truth. Each click, each share, each comment helps this message reach another soul in need of light. Remember, the world is not only hungry for food, it is hungry for wisdom, for healing, for connection with God. And perhaps by embracing something as simple and sacred as fasting, you can become part of the answer to that hunger. As Cayce said, make room for God. That is the essence of fasting, and that is the invitation for your life. They once called Edgar Cayce the sleeping prophet, but few realized that hidden in his trance readings was a revelation so powerful it could alter the course of a life in a single moment. In the dark years of the Great Depression, when families came to him in Virginia Beach with nothing left but despair, Cayce spoke of 5 words, not ordinary words, but divine forces given by God himself, carrying the vibration of creation. He described them as living energies that shape health, destiny, and even the future of nations. Picture a mother, broken by hunger, or a man crushed by hopelessness, entering that quiet room. And as Cayce's voice, soft yet piercing, delivered those words, something in them shifted. 5 words, rooted in what he called the consciousness of Christ, carrying the power to attract healing, peace, and abundance, even into shattered lives. And today, those same words are waiting for you. Once you grasp their meaning, you will never see prayer, thought, or even the language you speak each day the same way again. During one session that left witnesses in tears, Cayce explained that words carry vibrations, and those vibrations return to us multiplied. He didn't mean this symbolically, he meant it literally. He said that words are like seeds planted into the universal mind, and that these seeds grow according to the soil of our hearts and the sunlight of our intentions. Some laughed at the simplicity, but those who practiced began to see results so powerful that their families could never again deny the mystery of spirit. Cayce made it clear, every soul, no matter how lost, could awaken the Christ consciousness within by choosing to speak, repeat, and live out these divine words. He called them channels of creation, and he warned that to ignore them was to block the very flow of God's blessings into your life. What might shock you is how practical these words are. Not abstract theology, but real forces you can use today. Think about this. Modern science has proven that words alter brain chemistry, changing heart rate, blood pressure, even immune responses. Yet Cayce was saying this decades earlier in a small room in Virginia, as neighbors and skeptics gathered to hear him. He described how the word love, when spoken in truth, could raise the vibration of a room, how the word faith could align a soul with its higher purpose, how peace, when held within, could radiate outward and transform conflict into cooperation. He said that hope kept the spirit alive through suffering, and that the name of Christ itself carried the vibration of healing and restoration. Love, faith, peace, hope, Christ. 5 words, woven directly into his readings. 5 words he declared were gifts from God to humanity. Not symbols, not poetry, but living codes of spiritual energy waiting to be awakened in your own life. But here's the part that no one expected. Cayce warned that these words are not magic spells. They only attract when lived with sincerity. He told a woman from Kentucky, desperate for healing, that repeating them without embodying them would be like planting seeds in dry, lifeless soil. She left disappointed. Yet months later, when she began practicing daily prayer with genuine love for others, true faith in God, a desire for peace, a sense of hope, and a focus on the Christ within, her health began to return. Doctors couldn't explain it. Her family testified to the change, and her story became one of many preserved by the archives. What Cayce was showing is that the words you choose each day, what you speak over your children, your partner, even over yourself, are shaping the invisible patterns that tomorrow will manifest. He insisted this was not suggestion, but law. Like attracts like, and the word spoken in Christ becomes flesh in your experience. When Cayce spoke about love, he didn't describe it as mere emotion or romance. He said love is the very fabric of creation, the force that binds the stars, the earth, and the soul. In a reading during the early 1940s, as the world trembled in war, he explained that love is the vibration most aligned with Christ consciousness. He warned that hatred, judgment, or resentment would poison the soul, not because of divine punishment, but because like attracts like. If you send out anger, it circles back to you. If you live in love, you draw more love, healing, and opportunity into your path. One woman from Ohio reported after a session that when she replaced her constant criticism with words of encouragement toward her children, not only did their behavior change, but her own health improved. This was Cayce's point. Love spoken with sincerity reshapes reality itself. The second word, faith, was central in dozens of his readings. Cayce insisted that faith is not blind belief, it is conscious alignment with divine law. In one session during the Great Depression, a man asked how he could survive without work, without money, without prospects. Cayce replied that faith was not about ignoring hardship, but about seeing beyond appearances to the unseen hand of spirit. He said, "Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." Long before positive psychology, Cayce revealed that faith changes the frequency of the soul. People who lived with faith, who spoke with faith, attracted circumstances that others called coincidences, but which Cayce described as the outworking of divine law. He pointed to the teachings of Christ himself, reminding the man that even a mustard seed of faith could move mountains, not metaphorically, but vibrationally, attracting the unseen forces that bring the impossible into form. The third word, peace, carried profound meaning in Cayce's sessions. During the war years, families came to him terrified about their sons overseas. Cayce, often with tears streaming down his face while in trance, would repeat, "Peace be within you." He explained that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the stillness of the soul when aligned with God's will. He urged people to practice speaking peace even in the midst of turmoil, because peace, like love, is contagious. One documented case describes a man who, after applying Cayce's advice, stopped carrying his bitterness into his workplace. Instead, he began greeting everyone with calmness and respect. Slowly, the hostility that once filled his shop gave way to cooperation. Cayce declared that peace attracts harmony, both inwardly and outwardly, and that without peace, even love and faith could not flourish. Then came hope, which Cayce described as the bridge between suffering and transformation. He often emphasized this to people who had lost everything, whether in financial collapse or in the grief of losing loved ones. Hope, he said, keeps the soul tethered to possibility, when circumstances scream otherwise. It prevents despair from consuming the heart. A striking example is a reading in Virginia Beach where Cayce told a grieving mother that hope is not denial of pain, but the certainty that the soul continues, that every loss will be redeemed in spirit. She later reported that these words kept her alive in her darkest nights. Cayce explained that hope attracts new beginnings. When spoken daily, "I live in hope, there is still a way," it becomes a spiritual magnet for renewal. Without hope, humanity collapses. With hope, even a devastated world can rise again. Finally, Cayce revealed the word that unites all the others: Christ. He didn't use this name lightly. To Cayce, the word Christ was not just a title for Jesus of Nazareth, but the vibration of divine wholeness present in every soul. He said that when spoken with reverence, this word awakens a force within us that aligns body, mind, and spirit with the creative source itself. In a reading from the early 1930s, Cayce told a man struggling with alcoholism that repeating "Christ within me" each day, while truly believing it, would begin to reorder his desires and his habits. Witnesses recorded that within months the man's life transformed. The addiction lost its grip, not because of willpower alone, but because the vibration of Christ reshaped his consciousness. Cayce emphasized that Christ is not outside you. Christ is the pattern of perfection placed within your soul since the beginning. Speaking this word is like striking a tuning fork that brings all of life into harmony. This is where the 5 words converge: love, faith, peace, hope, Christ. Each carries its own frequency, but together they form what Cayce called the path of Christ consciousness. When combined, they are not simply words, they are keys. Imagine a locked door that holds the blessings you've prayed for: health, guidance, abundance, reconciliation. Cayce said these 5 words, when lived, are the keys that open that door. And this is not a vague promise. Families documented healings, businesses turned around, relationships restored after they began to embody these principles. Skeptics traveled from New York and Washington to witness what was happening in Virginia Beach. Some left unconvinced, but others returned months later, humbled, reporting that when they applied these 5 words, their lives changed in ways no medicine, no therapy, no strategy had achieved. But Cayce also issued a warning: misuse of words has consequences. In several readings, he explained that speaking with fear, gossip, anger, or deceit plants poisonous seeds that inevitably grow. He said, "The word becomes flesh," reminding us that the universe echoes what we declare. A man from Kentucky once came asking why his life was a cycle of failure. Cayce answered that his tongue had sown curses upon himself and his family, and until he replaced them with love, faith, peace, hope, and Christ, nothing would shift. The man resisted at first, but later reported back with amazement. Once he consciously shifted his language, even his finances and health improved. This pattern, Cayce explained, is not superstition, it is law. The same way gravity works, whether you believe in it or not, the law of words works regardless of your awareness. Now think about your own life. What words do you repeat every day? When you speak about your future, are your words soaked in fear or are they guided by hope? When you describe yourself, do you echo judgment or do you reflect love? Cayce said that your life right now is the mirror of yesterday's words. But the beauty of God's gift is this: you can change tomorrow by changing what you declare today. That's why these 5 words are not just religious phrases, they are spiritual technology. Love sets the vibration, faith anchors it, peace sustains it, hope lifts it, and Christ completes it. This is the secret Cayce said would draw into your life exactly what aligns with your higher self. Not wealth for its own sake, not power over others, but the abundance, harmony, and healing that come from living in alignment with God's pattern for the soul. Cayce was practical. He didn't want these 5 words to remain lofty ideas written in books or repeated only in church. He instructed people to apply them daily, in prayer, in thought, in every conversation. For him, prayer was not begging God for favors, but aligning your soul with divine law. He said, "Pray the prayer of the heart, not just of the lips." That meant speaking love over your family when they were sick or discouraged, not merely worrying. It meant affirming faith even when bills piled up. It meant carrying peace into a conflict instead of adding more fire. It meant declaring hope when others drowned in despair. And above all, it meant invoking Christ, not as a distant savior, but as the living presence within you, guiding and healing every step of your path. Cayce warned that without application, these words were like seeds left in a bag, full of potential but fruitless. Witnesses reported that Cayce himself lived this way. Though often exhausted from giving readings, he was known for greeting people with gentle encouragement, never harshness. In Hopkinsville, neighbors remembered how he would pause to listen to a struggling farmer, offering a word of hope when no solution was visible. During World War II, families in Virginia Beach said Cayce's voice alone carried peace into their darkest nights. His life became evidence that these 5 words lived out attract more than circumstances. They attract transformation. He once told a group that when you live in love, faith, peace, hope, and Christ, you become a magnet for what your soul truly needs, not just what your mind desires. And this, he explained, was the true law of attraction, rooted not in selfishness, but in alignment with divine consciousness. To keep this truth alive, Cayce gave simple exercises. One was to start and end each day by repeating the 5 words slowly, allowing their vibration to sink into the subconscious. He recommended breathing deeply with each one, visualizing how love fills the body, faith strengthens the mind, peace calms the emotions, hope lights the future, and Christ unites them all. He promised that over weeks and months, this practice would rewire not just thoughts, but even physical health. Modern research on neuroplasticity and psychosomatic healing now supports what Cayce said nearly a century ago. Repeated words and beliefs literally reshape the brain and body. But Cayce didn't need laboratories to prove it. He saw it happening in real lives. People who followed these practices wrote letters years later, testifying to healings, restored marriages, new beginnings, and deep inner peace. And here is a critical truth Cayce shared. These words are not for private use only. They are meant to be spoken into the world. He explained that when you speak love into a conversation, the vibration lingers, influencing others beyond what you see. When you declare faith in front of someone drowning in doubt, you help lift them into new possibility. When you bring peace into a tense meeting, you shift the energy of the room. When you carry hope into a grieving family, you light a spark that keeps them alive. And when you invoke Christ consciousness, not as dogma but as a living force, you invite the very presence of God to manifest in your midst. Cayce believed that if enough people practiced this, entire communities, even nations, could be transformed. That's why he insisted that the true destiny of humanity is collective awakening to these principles. Cayce often linked these 5 words not only to emotional and spiritual well-being, but also to physical healing. He explained that the body is a reflection of the spirit, and when the inner life is out of balance, illness appears as a warning. In one session, he said that harboring resentment blocks love, and that this blockage manifests as tension in the nerves and even disease in the organs. By restoring love, spoken and felt, the flow of energy returns, and the body begins to heal. He told a young man in Virginia Beach that repeating "Christ within me brings peace" daily would calm his insomnia. Within weeks, the man's rest improved. Another case described a woman bedridden by arthritis who began meditating on the 5 words each morning. While doctors remained puzzled, her pain gradually lessened. Cayce's conclusion was clear: words are medicine when aligned with Christ consciousness. He also tied the power of words to the Akashic records, which he described as the universal memory of every soul. In trance, Cayce often spoke as if reading directly from these records, explaining that the words we choose are recorded, shaping our soul's journey across lifetimes. When asked why some people seemed cursed with repeating misfortunes, Cayce explained that harmful words spoken in past lives carried forward into present circumstances. The good news, he said, was that new words, spoken with love, faith, peace, hope, and Christ, could rewrite the record. "You are never bound to yesterday," he declared, "for in Christ consciousness all things become new." Imagine the power of realizing that every word today is inscribed in eternity, forming the reality you will encounter tomorrow. This, Cayce taught, was the responsibility and privilege of being human, and he went even deeper, connecting these words to the evolution of the soul. Cayce explained that the purpose of life is not wealth, fame, or power, but the gradual awakening of the Christ within each soul. These 5 words, he said, are stepping stones in that process. Love teaches us to see God in others. Faith anchors us when illusions tempt us to despair. Peace brings harmony so that the soul can hear the still small voice of spirit. Hope lifts us beyond the trials of a single lifetime, reminding us that we are eternal. And Christ unites them all, revealing the ultimate truth, that every soul is destined to return to its source. He told one seeker in the 1930s, "The measure of your growth is not in how much you know, but in how much of Christ you have expressed in word and deed." For Cayce, these teachings were not theory, they were urgent instructions for humanity. He warned that civilizations fall when they forget the sacred power of words. History, he said, is filled with empires built on deceit and fear that eventually crumbled. But individuals and communities grounded in these 5 words would endure, attract blessings, and evolve together. That's why he insisted his followers not worship him or even his gift, but to live the words daily. His message echoes across generations. Your words are your destiny, and in Christ consciousness you hold the keys to attract everything your soul was meant to experience. Love, faith, peace, hope, Christ. These are not abstract ideals. They are the living forces God gave you, and they are waiting right now to transform your life. So now the question is not whether these 5 words work, it is whether you will choose to live them. Cayce said that every soul has the Christ pattern within, but only those who awaken it through daily practice experience the fullness of God's promise. Love without faith collapses under pressure. Faith without peace becomes fanaticism. Peace without hope turns into resignation. Hope without Christ is fragile optimism. But together these words form an unbreakable chain, connecting heaven and earth, spirit and body, past and future. Imagine beginning each morning not with anxiety, but with a quiet moment repeating, love, faith, peace, hope, Christ. Imagine carrying that vibration into your work, your family, your struggles. What could change? According to Cayce, everything. In one of his last sessions, weakened by years of service, Cayce whispered to those present that the Christ consciousness was the destiny of all humanity. He urged them not to wait for miracles from outside, but to become the miracle through the words they lived. This is why his legacy remains alive long after his death in 1945, because people discovered that his message was not about following a prophet, but about awakening the prophet within. He taught that words are bridges between the seen and unseen, between the finite and infinite. And when those words are aligned with love, faith, peace, hope, and Christ, the bridge becomes a highway of blessings flowing into every area of life. Today, you stand before the same choice those seekers faced in Virginia Beach, Hopkinsville, and beyond. Will you